The December morning air was crisp and cold as Carole Middleton stepped out of her car at Kensington Palace. She pulled her wool coat tighter around her shoulders and smiled at the familiar sight of the grand entrance. After all these years, visiting her daughter Catherine and the grandchildren still filled her with a warm sense of pride and joy. Today was particularly special because she had planned something very meaningful for her youngest granddaughter, Princess Charlotte. As she walked through the palace corridors, Carole's mind wandered to the conversation she'd had with Catherine just a week ago. Her daughter had mentioned how Charlotte had been asking questions about Christmas traditions and seemed curious about how different families celebrated the holiday season. The 9-year-old princess was at that wonderful age where she was beginning to understand the deeper meanings behind family customs and wanted to learn about her heritage from both sides of the family. Carole had always been close to all 3 of her grandchildren, but she shared a particularly special bond with Charlotte. Perhaps it was because Charlotte reminded her so much of Catherine at that age, curious, thoughtful, and always eager to help others. The little princess had a natural warmth that drew people to her, and Carole had watched with pride as Charlotte grew more confident in her public appearances while maintaining her genuine, caring nature. When Carole reached the family's private quarters, she found Charlotte in the sitting room, carefully arranging some Christmas cards on a small table. The princess was wearing a simple burgundy dress with her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, looking every bit the proper young lady she was becoming. What struck Carole most was the concentration on Charlotte's face as she worked, treating even this simple task with the kind of attention and care that showed her developing sense of responsibility. "Granny Carole!" Charlotte exclaimed when she noticed her grandmother in the doorway. She immediately abandoned her task and rushed over for a hug. Carole felt her heart swell as she embraced her granddaughter, breathing in the familiar scent of Charlotte's shampoo and feeling the genuine enthusiasm in the child's embrace. "Hello, my darling," Carole said softly, holding Charlotte at arm's length to get a good look at her. "You've grown again since I last saw you. Soon you'll be taller than me." Charlotte giggled at this, a sound that never failed to bring joy to anyone who heard it. "Mama said you were coming to help me with something special today. She wouldn't tell me what it was, but she said it was something you used to do with her when she was little." Carole's eyes twinkled with anticipation. She had indeed planned something very special for Charlotte, a tradition from her own childhood that she had passed down to Catherine and her siblings, but had never had the chance to share properly with her granddaughter. With the busy schedule of royal life and the formal nature of many family gatherings, intimate moments like these were precious and rare. "That's right, sweetheart," Carole said, settling down on the sofa and patting the cushion beside her. "But first, I want to hear about what you've been up to. How is school going? Are you excited about Christmas?" Charlotte perched on the edge of the sofa, her posture naturally graceful even in casual moments. "School is wonderful, Granny. We're learning about different Christmas traditions around the world in our social studies class. Did you know that in Germany, they have Christmas markets that stay open for weeks? And in Mexico, they have something called Las Posadas where they act out Mary and Joseph looking for shelter." Carole listened with genuine interest as Charlotte continued to share what she had learned. The child's enthusiasm for learning and her natural curiosity about other cultures reminded Carole of the conversations she used to have with Catherine at the same age. It was clear that Charlotte was developing into a thoughtful, globally minded young person, exactly the kind of qualities that would serve her well in her future role. "And what about our family traditions?" Carole asked gently. "What are some of your favorite Christmas memories with us?" Charlotte's face lit up as she began to recount various holiday gatherings. She talked about the Christmas Eve service at Sandringham, the excitement of opening presents on Christmas morning, and the elaborate family dinners. But as she spoke, Carole noticed something in Charlotte's expression, a hint of wistfulness, as if she were searching for something more personal, more intimate in these grand celebrations. "Those all sound wonderful, darling," Carole said carefully. "But what about quieter moments? Times when it's just family, without all the formality and protocol?" Charlotte paused, considering the question seriously. I love those times too, but sometimes I feel like there's so much I don't know about our family's history. I mean, the royal traditions and everything. But what about before that? What about Mama's childhood? What about your traditions, Granny? This was exactly the opening Carole had been hoping for. She had brought with her today a small, worn wooden box that contained items from her own childhood Christmases, items that held memories and stories she had never fully shared with Charlotte. The box represented a connection to the Middleton family heritage that went beyond the royal spotlight and formal occasions. "Well, my dear," Carole said, reaching into her handbag and pulling out the wooden box. "That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about today. This box has been in our family for many years, and today I think you're old enough to learn about some of the special traditions it contains." Charlotte's eyes widened with curiosity as she looked at the simple wooden box. It wasn't ornate or decorated like many of the items she was accustomed to seeing in the palace. Instead, it had a natural, well-worn beauty that spoke of years of careful handling and love. The wood had been polished smooth by countless touches, and there were small scratches and marks that told stories of its own journey through time. "This box belonged to my grandmother, your great-great-grandmother," Carole explained. "She gave it to my mother when she got married, and my mother gave it to me. Inside are some very special things that represent our family's Christmas traditions that go back generations." As Carole spoke, she noticed Charlotte listening with rapt attention. The princess had inherited her mother's ability to focus completely on something that interested her, and right now, all of Charlotte's attention was focused on the mysterious box and the stories it might contain. "Can I open it?" Charlotte asked softly, her hands hovering over the box, but not quite touching it, showing the respect and patience that had been carefully instilled in her from a young age. "Of course, darling. But first, let me tell you about your great-great-grandmother, because understanding her story will help you understand why these things are so special." Carole began to tell Charlotte about her grandmother, a woman who had lived through both world wars and had raised her children during difficult times when resources were scarce and families had to rely on their creativity and love to make holidays special. She described how this remarkable woman had started many of the Middleton family traditions, how she had believed that the most meaningful Christmas moments weren't about expensive gifts or elaborate celebrations, but about the love and care that families put into creating memories together. As she spoke, Carole watched Charlotte's expression carefully. She could see the princess absorbing every word, clearly moved by the stories of resilience and love that had shaped their family's history. It was exactly the kind of connection to her heritage that Carole had hoped to provide, not just the grand history that Charlotte learned about in her formal education, but the personal, intimate history of the people who had loved and cared for each generation. "She sounds like she was an amazing woman," Charlotte said thoughtfully. "I wish I could have met her." "In a way, you can meet her through the tradition she started," Carole replied. "Every time we continue one of her Christmas customs, we're honoring her memory and keeping her spirit alive in our family. That's what tradition really means. It's not just about doing the same things year after year, but about carrying forward the love and values that those traditions represent." Charlotte nodded solemnly, clearly understanding the weight of what her grandmother was sharing with her. At 9 years old, she was beginning to grasp the concept of legacy and the responsibility that came with being part of a family with such rich history and tradition. "Now," Carole said, her voice filled with anticipation, "are you ready to see what's inside the box?" Charlotte's face broke into a smile of excitement mixed with reverence. She carefully lifted the lid of the wooden box, and as it opened, both she and Carole leaned forward to see the treasures within. The afternoon sun streaming through the palace windows caught the contents of the box, creating a magical moment that felt suspended in time. Inside the box were several items that, while simple in appearance, carried generations of love and tradition. There was a small, hand-carved wooden angel that had been made by Charlotte's great-great-grandfather as a gift for his wife during their first Christmas together. There was a collection of handwritten Christmas cards, yellowed with age, but still readable, that contained messages of love and hope from family members who had passed away years ago. But what caught Charlotte's attention most was a small, leather-bound notebook filled with handwritten recipes and traditions. The pages were worn soft from years of use, and the ink had faded in some places, but the love that had gone into creating this family record was unmistakable. "This is our family's Christmas tradition book," Carole explained softly. "Every generation has added to it. There are recipes for special Christmas cookies that your great-great-grandmother created, instructions for making homemade decorations, and stories about how our family celebrated Christmas through the years." Charlotte reached out tentatively and touched the edge of the notebook. "May I read some of it?" "Of course, my darling. In fact, that's exactly what I was hoping we could do together today. I thought we might choose one of the traditions from this book and create it together, just the two of us. It would be our special grandmother-granddaughter Christmas project." The idea clearly delighted Charlotte, who was always eager to learn new things and spend quality time with the adults she loved. She carefully lifted the notebook from the box and began to flip through its pages, her eyes wide with wonder at the family history contained within its covers. As Charlotte explored the notebook, Carole reflected on how perfect this moment felt. In a world where the young princess was often surrounded by formality and public attention, this quiet afternoon represented something precious and rare, an opportunity for genuine connection and the passing down of family wisdom that had nothing to do with royal protocol or public expectations. The tradition Carole had in mind for them to share was one that her own grandmother had taught her many years ago: the creation of handmade Christmas ornaments using natural materials and simple techniques that had been passed down through generations of Middleton women. It was a tradition that emphasized creativity, patience, and the kind of mindful attention that turned simple materials into treasured keepsakes. "Granny," Charlotte said suddenly, looking up from the notebook with excitement in her eyes, "there's a recipe here for something called memory ornaments." "What are those?" Carole smiled, touched that Charlotte had found that particular page. "Those, my dear, are exactly what I was hoping we might make together today." Charlotte's eyes sparkled with anticipation as she read the faded handwriting on the page, describing memory ornaments. The recipe, written in careful script by her great-great-grandmother, explained how these special decorations were created using pressed flowers, herbs from the family garden, and small mementos that held particular significance for the family. Each ornament was designed to capture and preserve a specific memory, creating a collection of tangible reminders of precious moments and loved ones. "The idea," Carole explained as she moved closer to Charlotte on the sofa, "is that each ornament tells a story about our family or represents something important that happened during the year. Your great-great-grandmother started making these during the war years when money was tight and store-bought decorations were difficult to find. But she discovered that these handmade ornaments became much more meaningful than anything she could have purchased." Charlotte traced her finger along the lines of the recipe, reading aloud some of the instructions. "Use flowers picked during special family moments. Include a small written note about the memory being preserved. Handle with love and patience, as these ornaments will become family treasures for generations to come." She looked up at her grandmother with wonder. "This is so much more special than regular ornaments, isn't it?" "It is indeed, my darling. And what makes it even more special is that I brought some materials today so that you and I can create your very first memory ornament together. Would you like that?" Charlotte's response was immediate and enthusiastic. She carefully closed the notebook and set it aside, then turned her full attention to her grandmother. "Oh yes, please. But what memory should we preserve? And what materials do we use?" Carole reached into her handbag and pulled out a small cloth bag. "Well, I brought some pressed flowers from my garden at home, flowers that I picked and pressed last summer when you and your brothers came to visit me. Do you remember that afternoon when we spent hours in the garden and you helped me deadhead the roses?" Charlotte's face lit up with recognition. Yes, and we found that family of hedgehogs living under the lavender bushes. You said they were probably a mother and her babies looking for a safe place to raise their family. Exactly right. And you were so gentle and quiet when we discovered them. You insisted we move our gardening activities to the other side of the garden so we wouldn't disturb them. That's the kind of memory that deserves to be preserved forever. As Carole spoke, she began to lay out the materials she had brought. There were several pressed flowers in various shades of purple, pink, and yellow, roses, lavender, and some small wildflowers that Charlotte had particularly admired during that summer visit. There were also some delicate ferns and small leaves that had been carefully preserved between the pages of books for months. Charlotte watched in fascination as her grandmother arranged the materials on the coffee table. How did you know to save these flowers, Granny? Did you know we would be making ornaments with them? Not exactly, sweetheart, but I've learned over the years that it's worth preserving beautiful things from special moments, even when you're not sure how you'll use them later. Sometimes the most meaningful projects come from materials we've saved simply because they reminded us of happy times. This philosophy resonated deeply with Charlotte, who had always been the type of child to collect interesting stones, beautiful leaves, and other natural treasures during family walks and outings. Her room at Kensington Palace contained several small boxes and containers filled with such collections, much to her parents' amused tolerance. Now, Carole continued, pulling out some additional supplies. We'll also need some clear glass ornament balls. I brought several different sizes, some glue that dries completely clear, some narrow ribbon for hanging, and some small pieces of paper for writing our memory notes. Charlotte examined each item with the careful attention she brought to any new learning experience. She picked up one of the glass ornaments, holding it carefully and admiring how the light passed through it. These are so delicate and pretty. I can imagine how beautiful they'll look with the flowers inside. They will be lovely, but remember, the real beauty comes from the memories they represent. Now, let's start by choosing which flowers we want to use for your first ornament. Look at each one and see which ones bring back the strongest memories of that day in the garden. Charlotte spent several minutes examining the pressed flowers, occasionally picking one up to look at it more closely. Her natural artistic sense, which had been evident since she was very young, guided her choices as she selected flowers that not only looked beautiful, but also held personal significance. I want to use this small rose, she said finally, holding up a delicate pink bloom. It's from the bush by your kitchen window, the one that you said bloomed all summer long because it got just the right amount of morning sun. Perfect choice. That rose bush was actually planted by your grandfather many years ago as an anniversary gift to me. It's continued to bloom beautifully every year since then. Charlotte smiled at this additional layer of meaning. So the ornament will have memories from both that day and from when Grandpa planted the rose bush. Exactly right. That's what makes these memory ornaments so special. They often contain multiple generations of family history in one small treasure. Charlotte continued selecting her materials, choosing some lavender sprigs because they still smell wonderful even after being pressed, a small fern because it looked like tiny green lace, and one of the wildflowers because you said it was called Forget-Me-Not, and that seemed perfect for a memory ornament. As they worked together to arrange the flowers inside the glass ornament, Carole was struck by Charlotte's natural patience and attention to detail. The princess took her time positioning each element, considering how they would look from different angles and making sure that the arrangement would be pleasing when the ornament was hung on a tree. This is quite tricky, Charlotte observed as she used a small tool to position a piece of lavender. You have to think about how everything will settle when the ornament is right side up, don't you? That's very perceptive of you, darling. It does take practice to learn how to arrange things inside a round space like this. But you're doing beautifully for your first attempt. The process of creating the ornament was meditative and peaceful. As they worked, Charlotte asked questions about other family traditions, about Carole's own childhood Christmases, and about the stories behind some of the other items in the wooden box. Carole answered each question thoughtfully, understanding that she was not just teaching Charlotte a craft, but was helping her granddaughter understand her place in the long line of family history. "Granny," Charlotte said during a quiet moment, "do you think Mama would like to learn about these traditions too? I know she's very busy with her royal duties, but sometimes I think she misses the simpler times from when she was growing up." The question showed remarkable insight for a 9-year-old, and Carole felt a surge of pride at Charlotte's emotional intelligence and her concern for her mother's well-being. "I think your mama would love to learn about these traditions with you. In fact, I was hoping that after we finish your first ornament today, you might want to help me plan a special evening where we could teach the whole family about some of these customs." Charlotte's face brightened considerably at this suggestion. "Really? We could teach Papa and George and Louis too? They would love this, especially Louis. He's always asking questions about everything. I think that would be wonderful. And you could be my assistant teacher, since you'll be the expert on memory ornaments by then." This idea clearly delighted Charlotte, who loved taking on responsibilities and helping others learn new things. She returned to her ornament work with even more enthusiasm, taking extra care to make sure everything was perfectly positioned. "There," she said finally, stepping back to admire her work. "I think it's ready for the memory note. But what should I write?" Carole handed her a small piece of beautiful paper and a special pen with ink that wouldn't fade over time. "Write whatever you think best captures the memory you want to preserve. It can be just a few words, or it can be longer if you prefer." Charlotte considered this seriously, tapping the pen gently against her lips as she thought. Finally, she began to write in her careful, neat handwriting. "Summer afternoon in Granny's garden with the hedgehog family. The roses smelled like happiness, and we learned that quiet love is the strongest kind. Made with Granny Carole, Christmas 2025. When she finished writing, Charlotte showed the note to her grandmother. Carole felt tears prick her eyes as she read the beautiful, heartfelt words. The phrase "quiet love is the strongest kind" particularly moved her. It showed that Charlotte had understood something profound about the afternoon they had shared and about the nature of family love itself. "Oh, my darling girl," Carole said softly, "that is absolutely perfect. Your great-great-grandmother would be so proud to know that you understand the true spirit of these traditions." Together, they carefully rolled up the small note and placed it inside the ornament along with the flowers. As Charlotte sealed the ornament closed, both she and Carole felt the significance of the moment. They had created more than just a Christmas decoration. They had created a tangible symbol of their relationship and a lasting connection to their family's history. "How do you feel about your first memory ornament?" Carole asked as Charlotte held the finished creation up to the window, watching the light play through the pressed flowers. "I feel like I understand our family better now," Charlotte replied thoughtfully. "And I feel like I'm part of something much bigger than just myself." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense, sweetheart. That's exactly what family traditions are meant to do. Help us understand our place in the family story and give us ways to honor the people who came before us." As they cleaned up their materials and carefully packed away the wooden box, Charlotte was already full of questions about what they would do during the family tradition evening she and her grandmother were planning. The afternoon had awakened something in her, a deep appreciation for the quieter, more personal aspects of her heritage and a desire to share these discoveries with the people she loved most. "Granny," Charlotte said as they prepared to go find Catherine and show her the ornament, "thank you for sharing this with me. I feel like I know you better now, and I know our family better too." Carole hugged her granddaughter tightly, feeling grateful for this precious time they had shared and optimistic about the tradition-filled evening they were already beginning to plan together. 3 days later, Charlotte could barely contain her excitement as she helped her grandmother prepare for their special family tradition evening. They had decided to hold it in the cozy drawing room at Kensington Palace, a space that felt intimate and perfect for sharing family stories and creating new memories together. Charlotte had spent the past few days thinking about how to present what she had learned, and she had even practiced explaining the memory ornament tradition to her stuffed animals. Catherine had been delighted when Charlotte and Carole approached her with their plan. She admitted that she had been feeling somewhat disconnected from her own childhood traditions lately, caught up as she was in the demands of royal life and public duties. The idea of rekindling those simpler, more personal family customs appealed to her greatly, and she was touched that her mother and daughter wanted to share this experience with the whole family. Prince William had been equally enthusiastic about the plan, recognizing how important it was for their children to understand and appreciate both sides of their heritage. He had seen how meaningful Charlotte's afternoon with her grandmother had been, and he was eager to participate in creating more such moments for their family. As the family gathered in the drawing room that evening, Charlotte felt a wonderful sense of purpose. She was wearing her favorite deep blue dress, the one that made her feel both comfortable and special, and she had carefully arranged her hair with a small pin that had belonged to her great-great-grandmother, another treasure from Carol's wooden box. George and Louis were curious about what their sister and grandmother had planned, though Louis was having trouble sitting still in anticipation. At 7 years old, he was naturally energetic and struggled with activities that required extended periods of quiet attention. Charlotte, understanding her youngest brother's nature, had suggested that they include some hands-on activities that would keep him engaged. Before we begin, Carole announced to the assembled family, Charlotte has something very special to show you all. She's going to be my assistant teacher this evening, because she's now an expert in some very important family traditions. Charlotte felt a flutter of nervous excitement as all eyes turned to her. Public speaking, even her own family, still made her a little anxious, but the importance of what she wanted to share gave her confidence. She stood up and walked to the small table where her memory ornament was displayed. 3 days ago, Granny Carole taught me about something called memory ornaments. Charlotte began, her voice clear and steady. These are Christmas decorations that our family has been making for generations, but they're much more special than regular ornaments because each one preserves a particular memory or story from our family's history. As she spoke, Charlotte picked up her ornament and held it carefully so that the pressed flowers inside were visible to everyone. The evening light from the lamps made the glass glow warmly, and the delicate flowers seemed to dance in their transparent container. This one contains flowers from Granny's garden that we picked during my visit last summer, Charlotte continued. But it's not just about the flowers themselves. It's about remembering that perfect afternoon when we discovered the hedgehog family and learn about taking care of things that are small and vulnerable. William and Catherine exchanged a meaningful look, both of them moved by their daughter's thoughtful explanation and the maturity she was showing in understanding the deeper meanings behind family traditions. George leaned forward with interest, clearly intrigued by his sister's project, while Louis tried his best to sit still and listen. The most wonderful part, Charlotte went on, is that inside the ornament, along with the flowers, there's a small note that tells the story of that day. So even years from now, when I'm grown up, I'll be able to remember exactly what made that afternoon so special. Carole watched with pride as Charlotte explained the tradition. The princess had clearly absorbed not just the mechanics of making the ornament, but the philosophy behind it, the idea that preserving memories required intentional action, and that the process of creating something with your hands could deepen your understanding of its significance. That sounds absolutely beautiful, Charlotte, Catherine said warmly. I remember making things like that with Granny Carole when I was young, though I had forgotten how special they were until now. That's exactly why we wanted to have this evening together, Carole said. Sometimes in our busy lives, we lose touch with the traditions that once brought us joy and connection. But it's never too late to rediscover them and create new memories around them. George, who had been listening intently, raised his hand as if he were in school. Charlotte, could we make one for our family? Like something that represents all 5 of us together. Charlotte's face lit up at her brother's suggestion. This was exactly the kind of engagement she had hoped for. That's a brilliant idea, George. In fact, Granny and I brought materials tonight so that we could all try making ornaments together. Louis, who had been remarkably patient during the explanation, suddenly perked up. "Can mine have something from our garden at Amma Hall? I found a really cool feather there last week." "Feathers can definitely be part of memory ornaments," Carole assured him. "In fact, your great-great-grandmother often included feathers, especially ones found during special family walks or outdoor adventures." William smiled at his youngest son's enthusiasm. "It sounds like we're going to need to gather some materials that represent our family's memories. What do you think we should include?" This question sparked an animated discussion as the family began to think about recent experiences they had shared that would be worth preserving in ornament form. Charlotte suggested including something from their summer holiday at Balmoral, while George wanted to represent their trip to see his grandmother's horses. Louis was determined to include his feather, and he also suggested adding some sand from a beach they had visited together. Catherine found herself getting caught up in the creative planning, remembering how much she had once enjoyed similar projects during her own childhood. "What about including something from our time at Sandringham last Christmas?" she suggested. "There are always such beautiful pine cones and winter greens there." "Perfect idea," Carole said. "And I actually brought some materials from various places, including some things I saved from last year's Christmas celebrations, thinking they might be useful for exactly this kind of project." As Carole began to unpack the supplies she had brought, the family gathered around the coffee table, their excitement building. There were pressed flowers from several different seasons, small pine cones, interesting leaves, tiny shells from beach visits, and even some small dry berries that had been carefully preserved. Charlotte took on the role of helper and teacher, showing her brothers and parents how to handle the materials carefully and explaining what she had learned about arranging items inside the glass ornaments. She was patient with Louis when he had trouble with the small, delicate pieces, and she helped George think through his design before he began placing items in his ornament. "The most important thing," Charlotte explained, echoing what her grandmother had taught her, "is to think about what memory you want to preserve and choose things that will help you remember that specific moment or feeling." William was working on an ornament that represented a family hike they had taken in Scotland during the summer. He was carefully positioning small pieces of heather and a tiny stone that Louis had given him during that walk. "You know, Charlotte, this is much more thoughtful than I expected it to be. It's making me really reflect on what moments from this year have meant the most to me." "That's exactly the point, Papa," Charlotte replied with a wisdom that seemed beyond her years. "Granny Carole taught me that when you take time to really think about your memories and then create something to preserve them, you appreciate them in a whole new way." Catherine was working on an ornament that included elements from several different family activities. A small flower from Charlotte's school sports day, a leaf from their autumn walk in Windsor Great Park, and a tiny shell from their summer seaside holiday. As she arranged these items, she found herself remembering not just the events themselves, but the feelings of joy and connection that had made those moments special. "I'm realizing," Catherine said thoughtfully, "that I've been so focused on documenting our family life through official photographs and formal occasions that I've sometimes overlooked the beauty of preserving these quieter, more personal memories." George was concentrating intensely on his ornament, which was themed around his love of aviation and included items from their visit to an air show earlier in the year. He had carefully positioned a small feather from the day, along with some pressed grass from the airfield and a tiny piece of metal that had fallen from one of the aircraft displays, which he had been permitted to keep as a souvenir. "This is quite difficult to get everything positioned just right," George observed, using a small tool to adjust the placement of his materials. "But it's also quite satisfying when it works." Louis, meanwhile, was creating what he called his adventure ornament, which contained his treasured feather, some sand from their beach holiday, and a small acorn from Amma Hall. His approach was more instinctive and less planned than his siblings, but his ornament was developing its own natural beauty that reflected his spontaneous, enthusiastic nature. "Look, everyone," Louis called out excitedly. "My feather is floating in the middle, and it looks like it's flying." The family paused in their own work to admire Louis's creation, and they were all charmed by the accidental beauty he had achieved. The feather was indeed positioned in a way that made it appear to be suspended in flight within the glass sphere, creating a magical effect. "That's absolutely perfect, Lewis," Carole said warmly. "Sometimes the most beautiful arrangements happen when we follow our instincts rather than planning everything too carefully." As the evening progressed, the family found themselves sharing stories about the memories represented in their ornaments. William talked about the hiking day in Scotland and how proud he'd been of the children's stamina and good humor during a challenging walk. Catherine shared her thoughts about how much she treasured the everyday moments of family life, the small experiences that might seem insignificant to others, but form the foundation of their children's childhood memories. Charlotte listened to these stories with fascination, understanding that she was witnessing something important. Her parents and grandmother were not just sharing memories, but were also revealing something about their values and what they considered truly meaningful in their family life. "You know what I love most about this?" Charlotte said during a quiet moment as they all worked on their projects. "It's that we're creating something together that tells the story of our family, but not the story that everyone sees in the newspapers. It's our real story, the one that only we know about." Her observation struck everyone deeply. In that moment, they all recognized that Charlotte had identified something profound about their family life, the distinction between their public identity and their private reality, and the importance of nurturing and preserving the latter. The evening concluded with each family member writing their memory notes to include in their ornaments. Charlotte helped Lewis with his writing, while George worked carefully on his own note, and William and Catherine took their time to capture their thoughts about the experiences they had chosen to commemorate. As they finished their ornaments and prepared to display them together, the family felt a sense of accomplishment that went far beyond the crafting project itself. They had created something beautiful together, but more importantly, they had strengthened their connection to each other and to their family heritage in a way that felt both meaningful and sustainable. 2 weeks later, on Christmas Eve morning, Charlotte woke early with a sense of anticipation that had nothing to do with presents or grand celebrations. Today was the day she and her grandmother had planned to present their memory ornaments as gifts to the extended family, and Charlotte felt the weight and privilege of continuing a tradition that connected her to generations of women who had come before her. The family was spending Christmas at Sandringham, as was their custom, but this year felt different to Charlotte. Armed with her new understanding of family traditions and her role as a keeper of family memory, she approached the holiday with a deeper appreciation for both the formal royal customs and the more intimate family practices that gave meaning to their celebrations. She had carefully packed the memory ornaments that she and her family had created, along with some additional materials that would allow her to teach the tradition to any family members who wanted to learn. Carole had helped her prepare a small presentation that would explain the history of the ornaments and their significance to the Middleton family heritage. As Charlotte dressed for the day, she thought about the conversation she had had with her mother the previous evening. Catherine had told her how much the ornament-making evening had meant to her, and how it had reminded her of the importance of creating space for quiet, meaningful family activities amidst the busy schedule of royal duties and public appearances. "You've given us all a wonderful gift, Charlotte," Catherine had said. "Not just the ornaments themselves, but the reminder that our family story is made up of all these small, precious moments that we choose to preserve and celebrate." Charlotte had felt deeply moved by her mother's words, and they had strengthened her resolve to become someone who helped her family remember and honor their heritage in all its forms. She was beginning to understand that being a princess wasn't just about public service and formal duties, but also about being a keeper of family traditions and values. When Charlotte came down to breakfast, she found Carole already in the dining room, having arrived early for the Christmas Eve celebrations. Her grandmother was wearing a beautiful deep green dress that Charlotte recognized as one of her favorites, and she had a look of quiet contentment that suggested she, too, was feeling the special significance of this Christmas. "Good morning, my darling teacher," Carole said with a warm smile as Charlotte approached. "Are you ready for our big presentation today?" "I think so, Granny. I've been practicing what I want to say, and I've arranged all our materials. But I'm a little nervous about explaining everything to Uncle James and Aunt Pippa and everyone else. What if they think it's silly?" Carole reached out and took Charlotte's hand gently. "Oh, sweetheart, they won't think it's silly at all. In fact, I think they'll be quite moved to learn about these traditions. Your Uncle James and Aunt Pippa grew up with some of these customs too, though they may not remember them as clearly as they once did. You'll be helping them reconnect with their own childhood memories." This perspective helped ease Charlotte's nervousness. She realized that rather than teaching something completely new, she would be helping her extended family rediscover traditions that were already part of their heritage. It was a role she felt honored to take on. During breakfast, Charlotte noticed how the formal grandeur of Sandringham seemed to coexist peacefully with the intimate family atmosphere her parents worked to maintain. The dining room was elegantly decorated for Christmas, but the conversation was warm and relaxed, filled with the kind of gentle teasing and shared memories that characterized any loving family gathering. Prince George and Louis were full of excitement about the day's plans, and they both wanted to talk about the ornaments they had made. Louis was particularly proud of his creation and had been showing it to anyone who would look at it, explaining the significance of his feather and beach sand with the enthusiasm of a natural storyteller. "Charlotte," George said during a quiet moment, "I've been thinking about what you taught us about memory ornaments, and I want to start collecting things throughout the year so we can make more next Christmas. Would that be okay?" Charlotte felt a surge of pride and joy at her brother's words. The fact that he wanted to continue the tradition meant that their ornament-making evening had been even more successful than she had hoped. "That's a brilliant idea, George. We could each keep a special box for collecting memory items, and then next Christmas we'll have a wonderful collection to work with." "I want to do that too," Louis chimed in. "And maybe we could make ornaments for other holidays, not just Christmas, like for birthdays or when we do something really special as a family." These suggestions delighted Charlotte, who could see how the tradition might evolve and expand to become an even more integral part of their family life. She made a mental note to discuss these ideas with her grandmother later. After breakfast, as the family prepared for the various Christmas Eve activities, Charlotte and Carole set up their materials in one of the smaller sitting rooms. They had chosen this space because it was cozy and intimate, perfect for the kind of meaningful conversation they hoped to facilitate. When the extended family gathered for their presentation, Charlotte felt a moment of nervousness, but it quickly passed when she saw the warm, interested expressions on everyone's faces. Pippa and James were there with their own children, and various other family members had gathered to hear about Charlotte's special project. "Good afternoon, everyone," Charlotte began, her voice clear and confident. "My grandmother and I wanted to share something very special with you today, a family tradition that goes back many generations, one that I think you'll find as meaningful as we have." As Charlotte began to explain the history of the memory ornaments, she could see her audience becoming increasingly engaged. She talked about their great-great-grandmother, about the wooden box filled with family treasures, and about the philosophy behind preserving memories in tangible, beautiful forms. "The wonderful thing about this tradition," Charlotte continued, "is that it helps us remember that the most important parts of family life aren't always the big, dramatic moments. Sometimes it's the quiet afternoons, the unexpected discoveries, the times when we simply enjoy being together without any particular agenda." Pippa was visibly moved as she listened to Charlotte's presentation. "I do remember Granny doing something like this when we were children," she said softly. "I had completely forgotten until now, but there were those special ornaments that she would bring out each Christmas, and each one had a story." "Exactly right," Carole confirmed. "And now Charlotte is helping us revive that tradition and adapt it for your generation and your children's generation." James was examining the ornament that Charlotte had created with particular interest. "The craftsmanship is quite impressive, Charlotte, and I love the idea of including written notes. It transforms the ornament into a kind of family archive, doesn't it?" That's exactly what it is, Uncle James. Each ornament becomes a little time capsule that preserves not just what happened, but how we felt about it and why it was important to us. As Charlotte continued her presentation, demonstrating the techniques for creating the ornaments and explaining the significance of choosing meaningful materials, she realized that she had found something she was truly passionate about: the preservation and sharing of family traditions that connected past, present, and future generations. The afternoon session was wonderfully successful. Several family members chose to create their own ornaments, sharing stories about recent family experiences and memories they wanted to preserve. Charlotte moved among them, offering advice and assistance, clearly in her element as a teacher and facilitator. What struck everyone most was how the process of creating the ornaments sparked deeper conversations about family history, childhood memories, and the values they wanted to pass down to the next generation. The simple craft project became a catalyst for meaningful reflection and connection. As the day progressed and Christmas Eve dinner approached, Charlotte felt a deep sense of satisfaction about what they had accomplished. She had successfully shared a cherished family tradition with people she loved, and she had seen how that tradition could bring the family closer together and help them appreciate the richness of their shared history. During dinner, as the family gathered around the beautifully set table in the formal dining room, Charlotte noticed something different about the atmosphere. Despite the elegant setting and the formal service, there was an underlying warmth and intimacy that seemed stronger than usual. She realized that their afternoon of sharing family traditions had reminded everyone of the personal bonds that existed beneath the protocol and public roles. Charlotte, her grandfather said during a quiet moment, "I've heard wonderful things about the family tradition you shared today. Your grandmother tells me you've become quite the expert on preserving family memories." Charlotte felt herself blushing slightly at the attention, but she was also proud of what she had accomplished. "Thank you, Grandpapa. I've learned that traditions are only meaningful if people continue them and make them their own. I hope our family will keep making memory ornaments for many years to come." "I'm quite sure we will," he replied warmly. "And I suspect you'll continue to be our family historian, helping us remember what's truly important about our time together." As Christmas Eve evening drew to a close and the family prepared for the next day's celebrations, Charlotte reflected on the journey that had begun with her grandmother's visit just a few weeks earlier. She had learned not just about making ornaments, but about the importance of being intentional about preserving family memories and traditions. More importantly, she had discovered that she had a talent and passion for bringing people together around meaningful activities. She was already thinking about other family traditions she might explore and share, other ways she could help her family maintain their connection to their heritage while creating new memories and customs for future generations. As she prepared for bed that night, Charlotte carefully arranged her memory ornament on her bedside table where she could see it. The pressed flowers seemed to glow in the soft lamplight, and she could just make out the edge of the memory note inside. Tomorrow there would be presents and formal celebrations, but tonight she felt rich with the knowledge that she was part of a family story that stretched back through generations and would continue long into the future. Her last thought before falling asleep was a quiet promise to herself that she would continue to be a guardian of family traditions, helping to ensure that the love and values that connected their family would be preserved and passed down through the beautiful, simple act of creating memories together. The memory ornaments were just the beginning of what she hoped would be a lifetime of meaningful contributions to her family story.